But today what we're going to talk about is some new plants. So new plants are always exciting. And so some of these are sort of new, meaning the last couple of years. And some of them I actually show you a couple of the older plants as well, just so that you can see the comparison, the differences between them. And I'll also be giving tips along the way as well. And depending on how much time we have, I might be able to get through all the slides. Because the one thing that I've noticed is that there are a lot of new plants every year, and I mean a lot. Like I think I might have only pulled out maybe about 70 this time around, and these are new sort of 2024, 2025. There might be a couple 2023s. The one thing with when new plants come on the marketplace, they're created often in some sort of a breeding situation where they're developing plants and they're part of a program, and then the company introduces them to the world and they go, hey, here's a new plant for 2024. And so they give you that picture. It looks really nice, and then they give you all the promises. It's going to be really good. You just can't wait. It's going to be the best plant ever. And then you go like, okay, well, when can I get it? And they go, well, that's a good question, right? So because they just introduced it, then it has to go into the market. Excuse me. It has to go into the marketplace, and it has to go through the process. And that's where it has to get to the growers. So the growers have to take them, pot them all up, put them into their container sizes that they want to grow, put them into production, and then maybe at some point that year, maybe they get to the garden centers and become available, or not. Sometimes it takes another year for them to come out. So that's why you kind of, when you're talking about new plants, sometimes you're lucky and you get plants that are literally new and they just come right onto the marketplace. And it has to do with how easy they are to grow, I think. And like plants like annuals are really easy to grow. So annuals tend to come on the marketplace faster. So all the different types of propagation that there are, each type of plant are done differently. A lot of the plants that we see are all going to be clones. So that means that somebody will develop this plant and it's just perfect. It does what they want. They spend tons of time breeding the plants to get the right colors and the right size. And then they will trial them. Sometimes they'll end up with 20 or 30 plants that are all similar, and they got down to these 20 and they think those are the best. So then they have to trial them for a couple of years. So they plant them out into these trial gardens, and they track them and track their numbers and everything, and they know which one it is, and then they decide through a group, and often it's master gardeners are involved and other people that come in, and they'll look at them and they go like, well, we've decided that this is the one we want, it's the best. And so okay, that's the one we're going to name. So then they take that one, and instead of it just having a number, they actually give it a name, and then they say, that's the one we're going to introduce. And then all the other ones are secondary, and unless they're special, they just basically discard them all and just go to that one plant and then start propagation to make sure it's all the same. So if you guys are aware of tissue culture, if anyone's attended any of my propagation classes, we talk about tissue culture. And tissue culture is where they actually take the cells of the plant and multiply them that way. So that if you get one plant, you can literally take one shoot off of that plant and then clone it by taking each cell and multiplying them into tens of thousands of plants. And then they grow them from that one cell and grow it bigger and bigger and bigger until it forms a little plantlet. And then they take that out, and then often they propagate that some more. So it's this way of bulking up. So tissue culture is really the way that most of the industry runs now, because it's one way to go from one little plant to 1 million plants in literally 1 year, which would have been, it's impossible to do that by cuttings. It would take years and years and years. So on we go. And so, so happy gardening. And the reason I say happy gardening is because when you get some of these new plants, they're super good. Like they tweak them for how long they bloom, what colors they bloom, how tall they grow, how easy they are to manage, and so there's so many of these new plants. But the new breakthroughs in plant breeding are making it all possible, and so that's where they've kind of discovered the way that plants will interconnect in ways of keeping the pollination of the plants. Most of them are hybrids, and they're keeping the pollination super clean. And it's just amazing, really, the different varieties. So today we're going to talk about perennials, shrubs, and trees. And I put trees on there because trees are not high on the list of new introductions. Like, you'll get a couple every year, but you don't. It's not like perennials, where perennials will get 200 or 300 every year. You know, with shrubbery, it's usually 100 or 200 new ones every year. It's just amazing, right? The amount, the sheer numbers. So, with perennials, there's a lot to choose from. And, you know, Achilleas, I started out going alphabetical, and I was just going to do all perennials alphabetical and then all shrubs. And then I thought, forget that. You know, but once I got into it a bit, I was just like, I just got to get this done and turn them in. But perennials, and a lot of us know Achilleas, that's the yarrows. You know, yarrow is the group. And there's just literally hundreds and hundreds of different types, different species of yarrows and Achilleas. They're just a fabulous plant. They're super easy to grow, super drought tolerant, super good for pollinators. They just have it all. And there are always new Achilleas coming out every single year. And right now it's the Firefly varieties are the ones that are coming out. And there's several different colors available, but typically, you know, when I'll talk a lot about these series. So what they'll do is they'll do this plant breeding, and they'll decide, okay, we got to get some more of these. This is really good. We're onto something good here. And they said, well, yeah, we've got a bunch of different colors coming out. Oh, good. Well, we'll group them all together. They all came from the same parentage. So they're all going to have similar attributes, meaning fireflies grow, you know, 18 inches high by about 30 inches wide, and they're going to have a beautiful tone that's different from one's previous. And in a photograph like this, it doesn't really ring through, right? Especially on one of these. I don't know if we can dim the lights a little bit more. That would be awesome too. Yeah, that would be great. And so the thing with the colors is that, again, on a PowerPoint presentation, it's difficult to see the true colors, but you kind of have to go with it. What I'm hoping today is that you'll get some of these new names, and you'll say, like, hey, I'm going to try that one. That sounds like a good one to try. And then it won't be until the next time we do a thing like this, and we're talking about the new Achillea that's come out, and then we'll say, well, how was that Firefly? And then you get feedback from everybody, and they'll say, oh, that was fabulous. It was super drought tolerant. Pollinators went crazy for it, and all those things. But, you know, maybe not. Maybe it was horrible and it didn't grow. Because that's the way you do it sometimes. So I always like, when it comes to Achilleas, I love the white ones because they're more close to the regular Achillea millefolium, which is the native one, which is most common, and it grows here throughout the valley. It's really the #1 pollinator plant. Like, all the pollinator insects go to this one. And so if I was going to grow one, I would grow Firefly Diamond to try it out and see how it reacts, because it should be really, really good. And typical of these Achilleas, they have a lot of attributes. They're mostly deer resistant, and I say mostly, but they are great for pollinators, drought tolerant, extremely durable, not really crazy about soil conditions. Yes?
So my yard is filled with yarrow, but it's not a nice yarrow because I call it invasive.
Yeah.
It likes to grow all over the place. Are you talking about, actually, because I know there are some yarrows that they don't spread.
Yeah.
Nastily everywhere. Would these be in that area, that
Yeah,
type?
they're a little better. They don't. The question is about whether they spread or not. And a lot of the Achillea millefoliums do spread quite readily. But remember that in the Okanagan we have a dry climate here, and that's how they like to grow, is dry. If you take the plant and grow it in a moist condition where there's irrigation and whatnot, it will just tend to go like, hey, I'm in heaven here. I want to be everywhere, and it'll spread. A lot of these hybrid ones, they don't seed as readily. So the regular Achillea millefolium does tend to seed. But again, I really don't water them. They just have to live like on their own. And the more we stay away from the water, the less aggressive they become. But as far as I know, and this is why we have to find these new plants and try them out and see. And there would be information on these in detail. Like I say, if we have to try to get through 80 odd plants today, we have to move to go through them. But so I can't get into too much detail on each or even that research. But we're going to just continue on that and go to Agastache. And Agastache group, really good. This one has been out for a couple of years, and I think Mary, where's Mary? There's Mary. Did you grow this one, Mary? And how was it? Seeds around a bit?
Not that one, the lime green one seems like.
This one was more tame. Yeah, so. Yeah, so, but this was new just a couple of years ago now. I think it's like maybe 5 years old or something. So it was, but it was touted as being one of the best ones for long blooming. You know, they just would bloom and bloom and bloom. So that was good. So now it's kind of exploded. There are just a ton of different Agastaches. So the Kudos series, and what I like about these, and this is what we're finding with new plants, not all of them, but if a plant is predominantly short and they come out with a new one, it's probably going to be tall. And if they come out with a plant that's predominantly tall, it's probably going to be short, right? It's just one of the attributes that you want. Everybody wants something that's, and mostly it's about being shorter, more compact, easier to manage, right? So that's what I'm finding with a lot of these. And the Kudos series are one of these ones that's sort of a medium size plant. And it stays generally under that. Really, I don't think it would hit maybe 18 inches or so, maybe 20 inches. But really lovely selection of different colors. Like, I'm pretty happy. The red, to me, it isn't really red. It's kind of like a dark pink, but, you know, sometimes they have to stretch for the names. But that's the way that works. But I love them. And, you know, a lot of them bloom a long time. They'll start blooming early in, just bloom right through. Are any of yours still blooming, Mary? Or? I don't think so. No? Yeah, so not sure how long they bloom, but again, these newer ones, often better than the older ones. So.
I just got back some that were blooming beautifully.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Mary. Didn't see you there. Yeah, they were really cool. So, yeah, they're really good. And so there's this Poquito is also another series. These ones are even smaller. These are more in that 12 to 14 inch range, so even shorter. So that would be kind of cool, like from my standpoint. I love plants that are compact but have long blooming periods, have drought tolerance. Did the deer eat yours, Mary? Mary's got the garden which has more deer. Yours same? So there you go, deer resistant as well. It's cool. It's a great plant. So the Morello one, I'm not 100% sure. It may not be part of the same group, but I just love the color so much. You know, I think that I love vibrant colors. That's just me. I mean, I like bright colors. What can I say? So onward with the A's. Artemisia, this is Silver Lining. I think it's been out for a couple of seasons, but it's a good one. It's sort of a result similar to Silver Brocade, if you remember that one, which is kind of a spreading, flat growing variety. And this one's just got a little more upright habit. But the foliage changes quite a bit from spring till fall. So when it first starts out in the springtime, it's got this real kind of a shaggy foliage, which is quite lovely. And it'll come up fairly, not super tall, but maybe up to about 18 inches or so. And then as the season progresses, it tends to lay down, and then the foliage ripens and becomes more lanceolate, which means, you know, more slender as it matures. So it's a good plant. I really like it. I love the silver colors. Again, and if it's silver, you pretty much know it's going to be drought tolerant, right? It's the hairs on the leaves that make them silver, and the hairs prevent the water from evaporating. So yeah, really cool plants, and also deer resistant, drought tolerant, and all those things. Not all the plants we're doing today are going to be drought tolerant, but I will let you know which are which. So then this is where I just said, well, I'm just going to go with the next one on the list because I had them all grouped together by photographs. But the Weigela families are really, really good. And the issue I always had with these plants, like from a landscape design approach, was that I didn't have much form I'm a real form person. When I plant plants, I like them to have a form, you know, so that means that it looks like this, or it looks like this, or it looks like this. Each plant has its natural shape and form, which from a design standpoint, that's huge for me. And so, yeah, it blooms purple flowers, but I really like the way it looks because plants don't always bloom, right? And so I still sort of have that issue with this whole family, is that they're kind of nondescript how they grow, but the smaller, more compact ones are more moundy and more compact, and they're actually looking more like like I call it, like a bun shape, which would be, I always think of a hamburger bun, like the top of it sitting on the ground, like it's a kind of bun shaped. But I like that in the landscape. I love to have plants that are not too big, that they're well behaved. So starting out with some of these ones, just again with the golden foliage, there's about 3 different varieties of the Weigela family that has golden foliage, which is kind of fun. Completely deer resistant, like deer just don't eat these guys. And quite drought tolerant too. They really don't need a heck of a lot of water once established. The only issue with them is that some of the varieties, we're not 100% confident that they're going to survive a winter that goes beyond about -20. Most of these are good. This Red Prince is a taller one. It's about 6 or 7 feet high, fully grown, but it's easy to keep it at, say, 5 feet by just taking out the taller shoots. So I really like Red Prince. It's a standard, and out at the airport, you know, I've got a few properties out there that I've worked on, and the deer just run rampant, and they never touch it, and they look great. No irrigation at all, and they're fine. So Red Prince is really good. But, you know, the Sonic Bloom is the newer version, right? So it's only like a shrub, like something 3 to 4 feet. So Red Prince is, I always considered Red Prince to be the dwarf because it was only 5 or 6 feet high. Because remember, Bristol Ruby, for all you people who have been following plants for years, was that Bristol Ruby is the big one. It's like 12 feet high, big arcing stems. It's red flowered as well. And that's where a lot of these originated, from Bristol Ruby. And when I started in the business, when I started selling nursery stock, probably in 1980, I don't know, 84 or so, there was only 2 or 3 varieties available of the Weigela group. And even in the 80s, once I worked at Burnett's Nurseries, they still only had 3 varieties, and that was it. So, but now, holy man, things have really exploded, and there's all kinds of them, and especially in the dwarf varieties. So, I had to put in the Tuxedo. Like, it's so cool, you know, dark purple, almost black leaves with pure white flowers. Like I'd like to. You have one?
I just planted like 7 of them in a ring around a little pear tree that we put in.
Nice.
Because the blossoms on the Tuxedo are very close to the color of the
Yeah.
blossoms on the pear.
Different.
Bloom 3 times this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing with these new varieties. Like if you look way back, these old Bristol Ruby varieties, they would bloom pretty strong in the early part of the year, which would be like early summer or late spring, and they'd have a really good strong bloom, and then they'd stop all summer, and then in the fall you'd get a secondary bloom that was pretty good. Not quite as good as the first one. But now, all these new ones, they're just sporadically blooming all season, right? Off and on, and depending on the conditions, they can be quite nice. But I really like this one. It's going to be an average height, maybe up to about 4 feet or so. Maybe a bit more. I don't know. It's variable. Oh, yeah?
I always found that there's a lot of winter dieback with Weigelias.
Yeah, and
That
that's...
affects the shape that you were speaking of.
Yeah, when I was talking about the winter dieback issue, is that it definitely has to do with their strain and what their parentage is. Because there's many of them that are just hardy as nails and no problem. But there's some of them that are really wimpy, and you just get like a -22 degrees Celsius, maybe -24, and they just die right to the ground. And so they come back often and shoot up, but it's a bit of a struggle with those. But so it's a mixed bag.
One other question, sorry. The yellow ones are beautiful, the yellow foliage. Are they more sensitive to very hot, sunny days than the
Well,
foliage like the or is
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So are the yellow foliage plants more susceptible to the sunburn and whatnot, sun scald? And it's true that a lot of plants that have yellow foliage can burn a bit more. I just find that in order to get the bloom out of them, you have to have reasonable sun. So I would say that if I had a plant that might have had a light colored foliage like that, golden, my tendency is to still keep them in good bright light, but try to maybe limit the afternoon sun a bit if you have a choice. But I really love, golden foliage in any landscape, and you can see it here, it's fabulous because you don't need to have flowers on the thing to make it look good. It's going to punch up anything that's anywhere around it, any purple leaves or any other colors. Like, so often if I'm doing designing, I'll be thinking about the foliage, what's going on with the foliage? Okay, well, it's mixing, it's okay, I got some purples and some greens and some reds and some silver colors and things. And then, okay, that's the foliage. Now the evergreen distribution. So then I think about where are the evergreen plants going to be? What does it look like in the winter? And then after that, I think, oh, springtime. What's going on in spring? What's going on early summer? What's summer? And what's fall? It's really cool. So these plants, the better plants, are really starting to bloom much longer. And many of these will just keep on blooming sporadically pretty much most of the season. Or you'll get these bursts where they just come on. So one of the favorites is the My Monet, only because it's got all this pink variegated foliage plus the pink flowers, and the plant stays quite tiny. It's only going to be about maybe 36 inches in diameter by about 18 to 20 inches high without any trimming. And it seems like I'm always dealing with stratas all the time, and they're subject to getting these wrong plants in the wrong spots, and then all their plants end up being a ball shape, because they're so big for the spot. And I know all you guys study right plant, right place. Well, there's no excuse anymore. There are tons of these small compact plants that you put them in and you leave them for 5 years. You don't have to be on the hedge trimmer right away, right? You don't have to be on it steady to keep them in control. So the My Monet has two different ones, and there's this one here which is, it looks pretty similar, but it's just called Purple Effect. And what it does is once it gets into summer, the foliage just gets this really purple hue to it. But it's also similar, it stays quite small. Midnight Wine was one that I was really happy with that. It's been out for a couple of years now, but it's very small. It's only about 14 inches by about 36 inches. But nice purple foliage, really dark purple, and then with pink flowers. And then this one is fairly new, is Electric Love, it's called, which is really cool, with the dark red flowers on the deep black colored foliage, and it stays really small. So how nice is that to have those options, right? And like again, for blooming, lots of different options, but the Sonic Bloom series is still amazing. And there's lots, like I left off, 30 different ones. I just tried to pick some that were kind of, and ones that are just entered the market, I think, within the last year or so. But Sonic Bloom, all those Sonic Bloom ones, they just keep blooming and blooming and blooming and blooming, and the blooms are fairly large, And Trilogy, which gives you all three colors, white, pink, and red on the same plant. And I really like that effect. Like, I'm not crazy about some of the other plants that have multiple colored blooms on them, but I really like this one. And green foliage again, so green with multicolored flowers. And the fine wine's been around for a long time, but it really is proving to be a good, strong plant. It's not as free flowering. It still gives you a good long bloom on its first bloom into early June and mid-June, and then it kind of slows down through the summer, but then kicks up again at the end of the season. So it's a pretty cool plant. I like it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Zones for Weigela in general.
Yeah.
Are they more hardy or kind of fragile?
The zoning of most of them is zone 5,
Okay.
right? Some of them are zone 4s. Some of the zone 5s are generous. They might be leaning more towards zone 6, some of them. And that's what we have to figure out, right? I think through all of us, that would be really cool if we had had some feedback when people try plants to say, hey, I tried this plant, it was awesome, it's doing well. At my house, it went to -30, and it's fine this spring, right? Whereas in other situations, maybe not so much. Maybe they're not. So, but when a plant dies, I keep telling people all the time, is when the plant dies, try to figure out what went wrong. Like, have it analyzed, or send me a picture or something and say, like, look at it, I found this, I had this problem, this is what happened. It died here and then there and then it was dead. So if we can figure that out, because is it a disease organism? That's a big question. Was it an abiotic disorder? Like somebody poured gasoline on it, or abiotic, somebody drove over it with a car. Or sometimes its temperature can be abiotic, right? It's just something that's affected that plant. So why did it die? And if it was just frost injury, and frost injury shows up really strong, where it's often the top of the plant goes and the roots are fine and come back later, which can be disappointing. I only put Astrophricardii in there because I love it. It's an old one. I wish they'd come out with these in all different colors, and you never know, maybe one day. Maybe one day. But they do have a new aster called Grape Crush, and it's one of the Dome series, I think, and this one is really a deep, deep, deep purple with a slightly smaller flower with more masses of blooms. And I really like the purple domes, the pink domes, plum dome. There's a bunch of dome series, and this is a new one, Grape Crush. Yes?
So I grew that.
Yep.
It's an extremely late bloomer.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I also found that in the pictures that it goes down to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it didn't in my garden. I actually thought it was kind of ugly.
Oh, okay. Perfect. That's what we need. And so the other factor is when you do have these, what I know people who grow the purple domes a lot, and they let it shoot up to about maybe 12 inches or so, and then they chop it off right to the ground. And it kind of delays the bloom a little bit more, but it makes the plant more uniform and more dome shape, because you can't trim it once it starts blooming, right? But yeah, they all are late, like September, October timing. So for these ones, that's why I like Astrophricardii, because it's often starting by mid-July. It's going, and it goes right till frost typically. Question?
Sorry, I have so many questions.
That's okay.
So I have probably what I think is an Astrophricardii
Yep.
tomato plant, no? I have no idea where they came from. They reseed themselves all over the place.
Yeah,
And
it's
they turn
this one.
into really long, rangy things. Well, they have a slew, nice flowers, of course,
Yeah.
which I just let them be. But yeah, I think you might have answered it. I can't like
Yeah,
pull
these
them
ones.
down and
Yeah.
make the flower clump more.
Yeah, it's not an Astrophricardii. So keep this in mind. Astrophricardii is actually two separate asters that are crossbred. And so they're crossbred, and then out of those seedlings, they picked one or two that were really good, and then they do those by cuttings. So that means that they're all genetically the same. And then they have one that's slightly different, and they call it monk, or munch, which means monk. But yeah. So any of these ones, if it did grow by seed, like I've never had a seedling ever. They have thick, fuzzy leaves, like they're almost, that's why they're very drought tolerant. They're a fuzzy leaf plant. And the deer only eat the flowers, which is great. So Calamagrostis, oh, you have the sun. Do you have to come out now? It was beautiful and rainy there for a minute. So Calamagrostis, of course, this is like your feather reed grasses. So that can be like Carl Foster or the Overdam, and Lightning Strike is one I really like. And Hello Spring is a new one, and I think it's going to be more sort of a slightly brownish tone foliage. It may be more drought tolerant than the other ones, and that's where we have to sort of discover that, right, by trying it.
Is it variegated or is it just solid green?
What's that?
Are the leaves variegated or are they solid green?
They're solid, sort of browny green,
Okay.
so it gives you quite a different look. Whereas like I say, lightning strike, I like it because if you want a variegated color, you want to have a variegated color. And we can just look at that here. So lightning strike is the one it's a little bit newer, and but really nice bright variegation. Like Overdam is one that's said, oh, it's a variegated Carl Forster grass. But you can't tell that from 2 feet away because the variegation is so slight, it's just a small amount. I far prefer Overdam over Carl Forster because it's way easier to handle. It doesn't grow so fast. It doesn't get as tall either. Sometimes if I need I want a feather reed grass that's this tall because I'm going to screen off my neighbor or something, and we know that all the Calamagrostis are up as soon as the frost, even when it's freezing out, they're starting to grow and they're happy nice and early. It's kind of a nice early touch. But the biggest issue is that they'll be tall, like about 5 feet or so, sometimes even more. The more water they get, the bigger they get. So they're okay. Not that drought tolerant. Like I have grown tons and tons of them, and you can definitely see that when you withhold water, they shrink down, and then they're only this tall, which is okay, but it's kind of nice to keep something in the middle. Well, these variegated forms are more compact, and they'll do it either way, whichever you like, either a bit drier. But I think that new one is probably just a bit more drought tolerant than the other ones. So hello spring. And again, that's the thing. Cool season grasses and warm season grasses, right? Warm season, you're not going to see them until you're well into May, and then they're going to start to grow and they'll look great. Pennisetum is like the most disappointing grass. Does anybody ever grow what is its common name? Foxtail grass or something? I don't know. Pennisetum, Alopecuroides, and all that whole group, Little Bunny and Hamelin, there's a whole bunch of different ones. But they're just a disappointment that you're out there in the middle of May and it's dead. Like it's not even showing green. And everybody's like, gotta get rid of that. Why don't you dig it out? It's like, well, sometimes it comes back. Well, it often comes back, but it doesn't come back till you're well into June. And by that time, you've already had 4 months, especially for us here in the sunny Okanagan. We get a long spring and a long fall and a long summer. We're pretty lucky that way. But that long spring, I far prefer my grasses to be up and going. Even the miscanthus that are late are way earlier than pennisetums. So I don't find that's a legitimate grass to grow. I mean, it's okay, we're gardeners, we try whatever we want. But I do see people using them in commercial plantings, and it's getting a little annoying to sit and look at the dead grasses until the middle of June. And these are legitimate businesses that are trying to attract people. Oh yeah, I want lots of grasses. Well, don't give them those ones. Give them something else. Anyway, that's it for my rant. I've been doing a lot on YouTube ranting about poor landscaping. Oh,
The previous ones, are they pretty polite? Do they?
this one or
Yeah.
you mean they stay where they're put? Yeah, they're clumping. And the variegated forms are easier to manage than the green forms. The green forms, they do tend to get really big. Just remember with all grasses, you want to be dividing them about every 4 years or so, every 4 to 5. And it's not always because they need it. It's because I can't physically go out there and dig out a grass that's 5 feet across. Like I just can't do it. I need an excavator to do that. So don't wait 10 years. Do it in 5 years and you might get a better chance. Or in 4 years is even easier. 3 years is super easy. So, and that's the problem with commercial plantings and people putting grasses in commercial plantings, is that nobody's ever going to divide those grasses. So they just go downhill, 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 dead. And then it's like, oh, is anybody going to do anything about it? Well, no. So that's my pet peeve is putting, I love ornamental grasses, but I also like people to take care of them. So maintenance people need to do that.
While you're on the topic of grasses, do you like switch grasses?
Panicums? Yeah, I like panicums. Yeah, I know there's some in the H2O garden, I think, some panicums, right? And do you find that, you would know maybe, Sigrid, do they seed around a bit or not? No? Good. Okay. So that was the thing. I don't have that much experience with panicums, but they
then again, if they're really well irrigated, they may start.
Yeah. I love the garden there. It's really cool. So yeah, so then a grass is not particularly drought tolerant, but is really pretty, and I wish and I think they will. They seem to come out with new varieties all the time. The Hakanakloa macra is the grouping, but Hakanakloa is Japanese forest grass. There's several common ones. They come in a straight green, which you can't really tell because the sun's shining down, but straight green, straight yellow called all gold, and then the variegated form, which is Hakanakloa macra aureola, and it's aureola with A-U-R-E-O-L-A, which means it's golden. So it's a golden variegated grass, and they're awesome. They need some water, but shady locations. If you want something underneath some trees, or you have a spot, like a lot of the plants, especially I find the drought tolerant plants, need sun. Like they need it to be hot and sunny. That's where they thrive. So when we have shaded areas and we think like we're trying to conserve water, so we have to withhold water from everywhere. But if we have one little spot in a shady location and we want to put water, that's where we would add this type of plant, right? And because they're the supporting actor, I call it, right? So whenever I do landscaping, I'm always working generally from a specimen of some sort. So that's a larger plant that's supported by surrounding plants that are less than 1/3 their height, ideally about 1/4 of their height. And this plant really suits those conditions. Because it is herbaceous, you won't see it in the wintertime, and it's a little bit slower to get started, but it's generally up by middle of May, so not too bad. And but what a beautiful show! Just a great plant. What's that?
I found where I had that it spread, and I was digging it out of the
Yes.
trees that didn't want it.
Yes, yeah, and it has to do with moisture too. It's like that Japanese blood grass, if you ever grow that. We used to call it Japanese blood quackgrass. but it was still cool. So I still utilize plants like that, but I'll do a root barrier around them if I feel it's bad. At my house, I don't water them very much, so they don't really spread very much. And mine mostly have died out now after about 10 years, which is kind of sad. But putting in, like, just if you ever get those big nursery pots from a tree or something, is save those and just cut the bottom out, and then you can plant that into the ground and put your plants that might be a bit invasive. And so some of the groups that are invasive are persicarias that you might know, that some of the persicaria groups, that polymorpha, I think there's some of those at the H2O garden, non-H2O garden. They're like that. They can be like just super aggressive and weedy, but if you can just plant them with a root barrier, really helps.
Excuse me, Ken.
Yes.
Of those three types that you have there, any more winter hardy than the other?
I found that they've been all reliably zone 5. I haven't had any die at my house, and I'm up on the hill in Lake Country, so I'm pretty close to being zone 4. But I really like the variegated form. Is my favorite one. It's really the only one I grow. I have planted a lot of these all golds only because they really came on the market in the last couple of years, and it's like you go to a nursery and that's all you have. So it's like, well, I need some hakon grasses, so that's what it's going to be. And the trick with these, it's funny, is if you do grow them in deep shade, they're green. But if you grow them with a fair bit of sun, like half and half, they're a nice golden yellow color. That's sometimes typical of golden plants, but not so much the other ones. But aruncus is one of my favorite plants. I love aruncus. They're native species to lots of parts of Canada. Chantilly lace is the one on this side, and again, you can't see it, that sun. The foliage is really dark. It's almost a blackened. It's not really blackened, but it's a deep dark green color. And then a really vibrant white flowers on blackened stems, so it's very intense. So I really love that, and that's the next one I want to try. And this is the newest one, is called goatee. Of course, it's goat's beard is a common name, so they're playing on that a bit. The goatee, which is just a tiny one that's only about maybe 20 inches high. There's lots of other types. There's tons of dwarf aruncus, awesome plants. And the nice thing with the aruncus is it just turns bright orange in the fall, and I love that about it. It's one of my favorite things about Aruncus. But yeah, the standard Aruncus is the goat's beard, which grows quite big, and it gets about 5 feet by 5 feet, and then it tends to fall over a bit, and it's quite nice.
Do you know anything about deer resistance?
On this one, I think deer ate it.
Stroke that one off?
Yeah, yeah, or else you have to
We have a dwarf one and it's just like, they just went through everything.
mow it right to the ground. Yeah, it's sad. Again, it's a native plant, so some native plants are going to be identified as browse. It's just sort of par for the course. Okay, so, and then we talk Coreopsis. So Coreopsis is a big group, and I don't know if, like every year, I'm always looking at what are the new plants this year, and then I go to the Coreopsis section, and it's just like vast. It's like, oh my God, there's like 80 new ones this year. And so I really don't, what I was hoping to do with this is I've got one that was sort of outstanding, so I'm going to talk about that. But I just really wanted to bring the attention to the Coreopsis group. The needle-leafed ones, the slender-leafed ones, are not as drought-tolerant as the wider-leafed ones. So if you're going for really drought-tolerant, you really have to go with the standard old-fashioned ones, which unfortunately, there was one right there, right underneath the picture, but that's okay. It's just the old-fashioned one. They often seed around quite a bit and a little bit weedy, but they bloom all summer, and they're great little plants, and pretty much deer-resistant. Yes, there we go. Always check with. No, I don't. Yeah, but the one thing is that all of these, there is a couple nice ones, I think, coming up here. So this is one of the ones that, again, is quite drought tolerant, and it's a newer variety, but it's ever blooming. This one it's a lot more brightly colored than what it looks in these photographs. It's more yellowy than these show. But early sunrise, oh my God, what a great plant. I planted some this year. I thought, oh, these are kind of nice. I bought them actually in 2023. And I took them out and I laid them all out at a job site, and then somebody said, oh, I don't really like those yellow flowers. I said, okay, so I took them back and I put them at the yard, and then sort of forgot about them. And they just sat outside in their pots above ground all winter, right? No problem. Remember last year, minus 33? Yeah, in a shady spot, like had no sun all winter. And I go out there in the spring and I go, oh, these things are shooting up. And they were absolutely fine. They didn't, and I didn't really do anything. I didn't water them or anything. And so I thought, well, they're pretty durable. That's nice. So I'm going to wait for a spot to put them in another job. And sure enough, this summer we got another job. So I popped them in, and they were starting to bud very early. Like in June, they were budding really nice. And then they started to bloom, and they were unbelievable. Really showy. I was like very impressed. And so, yeah, I can't wait to see how they do next year, because those were just little 1-gallon pots, and they grew about to this size by September and still blooming. So they bloomed pretty much all this summer, and so really good plant. It's short. It's only about 16 inches, I would say. I'll tell you next fall. But it's up to the individual. And I don't think these ones are going to seed around very much. But deadheading on those guys is typical, like on a lot of perennials that are floriferous like that. I just tend to grab the whole plant, all the blooms in one handful, and take the whole bunch off in one shot. And then I let it push back, and then usually it'll do a pretty good job reblooming.
And what was the name of the previous one, the yellow one?
With early sunrise, yeah. Yeah, it's really good. And so a couple more. These are, again, thread-leafed ones, and this one called Opal, which is a close-up of the opal flower. But Opal was really good because, again, its foliage is almost black, really dark foliage. And I like that contrast. I love to get plants that have a bit of foliage color. And then the sunstone, is just super floriferous. And when I read up on that one, it was just saying that, it's giving you sort of the maximum number of flowers per square inch comparative to other varieties. So those were two sort of outstanding ones. And again, when we saw like how many there are, it's just, we can't even begin to get into each one. I would just say that when you do see some of these, is to go ahead and try them. They're going to need a sunny location. The ones that have narrower leaves would prefer a bit more water. They can survive with less water, but I would be trialing them to see how well they do. And the ones that have the fuzzier leaves and a little bit wider leaves are way more drought tolerant, and you can easy to grow. So Echinacea, and I just throw Magnus up there because it was one of the first ones that they were hybridizing. And you know, Echinacea was just a standard in every garden. Or seeded varieties. They came in pink and white, and they all grew about 30 inches high. And they bloomed around the end of June into early July. And they were awesome. Lots of people liked them. Quite deer resistant. I'm not going to give them 100% deer resistant, but they're up there in that 96% or so. And Magnus came out, and it was just better than the old varieties. It was one of the newer ones. But today, of course, if you're aware, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So this is one of these plants that they've broken the code of how to get them to crossbreed them. And there's 3 basic varieties, like Purpurea is the common old-fashioned one, and Angustifolia is another one, and Pallida is another one. So there's these different groups of Echinaceas. Well, now, whatever they're doing is they're able to get them all to crisscross all together, and they're all blends of those 3 varieties. And lo and behold, doubles, singles, yellow, red, purple, orange, you name it. They have all, no blue ones yet, but they do have some purplish ones. They have a really dark purple one that's really cool. But a lot of the really good ones, like my favorite was always Salsa Sombrero, because it was that burnt pepper, dark red color, which is one of my favorites in the garden. One of my all-time favorites. But it's been out for a few years, so it's not really that new. But it's proven to be a pretty good plant. And it's relatively short, like under 16 inches, I think, for Salsa Sombrero. And really dark red, really good one. And so there's tons of them. And I really like this vibrant orange, too. It's like for me, I love orange in the garden. I don't know what it is. I think it's because in the evenings you go out and it just glows. Yes, question.
I've had multiple conversations this year with people that aren't happy anymore with echinacea. And
Yep.
they feel like, yeah, I put them and I put them in.
And they don't grow.
In 2 years and don't want to grow them anymore.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, yeah, I mean, I've killed mine. I don't know how, but, you know. And so I'm wondering, yeah.
Yes. There's 2 secrets.
I don't get to recommend them.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of these things that it's a varietal thing. There's so many. There's hundreds of different types and colors. The bigger ones are better than the shorter ones as far as vigor. So they get bigger faster. But I found the big ones, like I was growing a double orange one that was about 4 feet high. It was unreal. I had to stake it like a peony. But that thing was so aggressive. It just grew and grew and grew, and it was fabulous for years and years. So, and that was one of the new hybrids. There's 2 problems with the new hybrids, and one is this sort of unproven combination of flowers, of their hardiness. So in other words, you try them and hopefully they grow. And the other factor is when you plant them is a big factor. So they really shouldn't be planted too late in the season. They should be planted always before the middle of July, ideally. And that's just so that the root can get fully established before winter. And then I would even consider adding some surface mulch around them like I would with a rose or something to give them a little bit of protection. Because it seems like some of these hybrids, their roots they're subject to rotting over winter and they're subject to freezing out. Question?
One of our Zoom people, Anne-Marie Savard, she says she has one called Cherokee that starts orange and changes to pink over a week or so.
Yes, yeah, it's a beauty. Cherokee Princess, I think it's called. And that's one of my favorites, and it's one of the ones that's actually more readily available now, so it's really great. And if you can catch it at different times, and it can go quite mauvey, it can have rings of different colors in it, and it's really a good one. And that one's quite reliable.
Have you had any experience with them reverting to purple after a couple of years?
No. Have you?
Yeah.
All right. And it could be seedling too. It's like with
This is the main plant.
the main plant, yeah. No, but that's a good thing to add to this conversation. It's about them potentially reverting. The other factor is that sometimes they seed, and these guys are not big seeders. Like if you take the seed and grow them, it's just going to grow a pink or a light pink variety. So that's the other factor. If it grew taller or different, it sometimes, like I find it with lavender. So lavender, and we'll get to lavender. There's so many nice little dwarf varieties now and everything. But the seedlings come back sort of more like the original, like the older fashioned ones. And they tend to seed right into themselves because they don't cast their seed out. It just falls into it. So that's a bit of an issue, right? And it could be the same issue with echinaceas, that some of them are seeding and it drops into them. So if I did find one that was pink like that, I would follow it right down to the bottom and I would push my fingers right literally into the soil and try to grab it by the root if I could, and try to work it out and pull it right out if I could. That would be ideal, because then if it came out and you saw it was an individual little plant, then you could say, well, it's a seedling. But if you go down and it's attached onto a root, and part of the root is yellow and part of the root is pink, then you've got 100% proof that it's not a seedling and it's actually a reversion. So it could be, but see, mostly reversions happen not by hybridization, but by sports. So again, with a lot of plants, and the Weigelias there are one of the ones that reverts sometimes. So it's a cutting that was taken from a sport. So somebody had a big green Weigela growing and it had pink blooms, and then all of a sudden they saw this weird looking branch at the bottom that had variegated leaves or something. So it was a mutation. So they took the cuttings, because they're a good horticulturist, as they should, take those cuttings, root them, and grow them as individual plants now. And they maintain that variegated foliage. And like, oh, cool, now I have a variegated one. And lo and behold, they grow the variegated ones, and they get, oh, they're beautiful and they're big. And oh, this one come out with white flowers, like one shoot. Okay, do the cuttings again. Take those cuttings, and now we have a white flowering one. So they're cloning them, but they are off of a sport. So a sport is a mutation. And so mutations, there are plants that come from sports, they often revert back. And you'll see trees, shrubs, all that kind of thing. But with plants like these echinaceas that are hybridized, so they're actually, what you have there is you have cross-pollination of two different plants to create a specific effect. They generally don't revert back, but their seedlings definitely would. So that would be, like I say, that would be proof. That's how we would prove it, is by going in and yanking the thing out by the roots and going, oh, it's got a big chunk of root on it. So it's coming from the original plant, or does it have small fibrous roots indicating it's an individual plant? So some of the new ones, Delightful Lace, the Delightful series, they're fairly new. And there's a whole series of them, different types. But this one almost looked like a mum in a way, a little bit more mum-like. But pure white like that, double flower, it's just kind of interesting. You know, I always see these things mass planted, especially this yellow. Like, what a great color. It's kind of golden color. And it's a double. So typical of composite type flowers, right, is that each of these little tufts in the middle is a flower, and then these are just directing the bees where to get the pollen. But the flowers are within the center. So it's like a dandelion. Every little leaf in a dandelion is an individual flower. So they're all composite groups. But that's a beautiful one. Delightful Gold. I like that one. Princess Bride is a very nice, short, compact, pure white, dark green foliage, and a large cone. It's got a large cone in the middle. And again, the flower is the cone. The outer petals are just strictly runway for the bees. You know, right here, guys. This is where you get the pollen. And typical of echinaceas, the bees do love them. But again, all these hybrid ones, the new ones, plant them early, get them well established before winter, develop drought tolerance over time, gradually, and be patient, keep your fingers crossed, because it is one of these things, and that's where, again, with a group, is if you're trying different ones and people are all trying different ones, then eventually somebody just says, this is the one, this is a good one, this one is not, it's not causing any issues, it's It's hardy, it survives the winter. But yeah, good plants. Not particularly good at soggy, wet conditions over winter, which is one of the things that sometimes they develop a bit of a root rot. And the root rot happens. And once they develop that, remember that root rots are an actual fungus that's living in the root system. And so it's always there once it gets it, and then it's sitting there waiting for an opportunity to grow and take over more of the root system. And as you may, if you ever dug up Achinaceas, they have quite a big fleshy root. So the root system is quite fleshy. So any roots on perennials or anything that's fleshy, they're prone to having grubs attack. So having like insects chew on them because it's fleshy and got a lot of nutrients in there. And then as soon as something chews on it, they're going to rot from that location. So there's a lot of plants that have that. Instead of a fibrous root system, it's more rhizomous. It's bigger and thicker and juicier. So really nice forms with the tips, different colors. So French tips is the name on this one, and I like those. And then the other one is Prima Spider. I'm finding a lot of plants that are coming out with the name Prima in them, meaning new and improved. So this one I'm not sure if that's a new and improved variety. So delightful Sangria, which is a really nice, rich, purpley red color. And again, I'm not sure that the color is showing too accurately, but I like it. It's classified as a double flower and fairly short. So, staying compact. I always like to have things that are long blooming, and these things often are ever blooming too. Like I was telling you about the tall orange one that I had, and I would have to deadhead it for sure, taking out the deadheads. But the blooms were quite massive, and it had a double pom-pom in the middle with straight down orange blossoms on it. And what the problem I noted why maybe it was so excited was that it was growing on this huge pile of beautiful rich soil, and with beautiful compost surface, with beautiful irrigation, and everything was nice, and the thing just went nuts. And so I thought, still pretty good, because it bloomed from the end of June right till frost, nonstop. And I just kept deadheading it. Unfortunately, I think I could find the name of it, but it's that was when they first started coming out with some of these really good hybrids. So, and then going back to sort of a similar color, but yet not the same, is Revelation Coral. And I really love the way this one glows, like it's a very glowy sort of pinkish tone. But I love the way it has the light pink to the dark pink, and again, fairly short and compact. And I love that effect. And it would be interesting, like again, we have to trial these things. Any new plants, it's up to us to do it, right? I don't think the average gardener is gonna do it. But what we would do is say, take the plant, try it in a location, get it going, take a couple pictures of it through the season, and then get out there in the spring and see, oh, here it is, it's still alive, but is it gonna grow, right? Because sometimes they'll have leaves there, but they just won't push. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they push. I think I would try feeding the Achinaceas in the early part of the season, but when I say early, I mean in the month of May. Once the earth warms up a bit, hit them with some fertilizer to get them going, hopefully kicking them into gear. So assorted daylilies, and I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of daylilies that are new all the time. Pretty good plant, not totally deer resistant. Deer will nibble on them. It's funny, you get in some areas they're okay. It all depends on the deer. Sometimes the deer love them, sometimes they don't. But the thing with daylilies, they're all different, and so they're all fun. Some of them are really great, some are not so good. The older ones, they don't really bloom so good, but there's a newer one called Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I really love the color of this because it has almost like a super light pink color in the center before it turns yellow. So it goes yellow, light pink, and then dark red almost on the flower. So I thought this was a really nice one, and it should be relatively new.
How long does it bloom?
They're longer blooming, yeah. A lot of these new hybrid ones are good. Persian Ruby is another one that I kind of like that one. And I don't think this one's in the marketplace yet, but I'm hoping, I have hopes that within the next year or so. And they're just kind of cool to have a plant in there that's a little different. I love, like, when I'm working with plants, I was telling you a little bit about how I like it when plants look like this or look like that. So when I do landscape designing, I really am thinking about textures in the garden. So I want to have something that's really coarse and big leaves, something that's really cool. I should have some of those coming up. But something that's coarse texture, and then have something that's finer texture, like a grass or a daylily, somewhere nearby, because they look so different. It's just nice to get that sort of a little bit of a different texture thing. And if they bloom, that's a bonus, right? So I'm just going to go on to heucheras. And as we know with heucheras, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. This is one of the plants that they were able to get them into some sort of situation where they would get a lot of mutations. And so they've got thousands of mutations. And what they do with those is once they get a mutation that they think is fairly good, fairly stable, they do it by tissue culture again, and they multiply it into thousands and get them out into the marketplace. And they really do have pretty foliage. It's just because we're in the Okanagan, it's not my favorite plant because the deer chomp them right to the ground, even though a couple have survived the deer. Most of the ones I see are just little stubs because the deer mow them right down. And then if they do grow and proliferate, like the ones at my house, I have weevils. If anybody else has weevils, this is their favorite food. And weevils are really plentiful in the Okanagan, likely due to the pine trees because they're kind of a conifer pest. And weevils, the adults put the little notches in the sides of the leaves, and then they eat the roots over winter. And the plants at my house that get affected are anything that's closely related to a hydrangea, or anything that's a yew tree, or anything that's a heuchera, and my peonies. My peonies have been just devastated. So luckily you can get the product called Grub Be Gone. And Grub Be Gone is I think they always called it organic. It's a bacteria. I'm not 100% sure what's organic and what's not anymore, but bacteria that when it's consumed by the weevil larva, it kills the larva. And it works like really good. So I did mine because the weevil larvas come on in late August and early September. That's when they're hatching out of their eggs, and they're just very, very tiny. And they're going to live in the soil eating the roots all winter, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And by spring, they're already about a half an inch long. So that means timing when you put on your weevil control is always done around the end of August, early September, and you can just use that product. It's called Grub Be Gone. Grub Be Gone, and there's several other ones on the market. There's a nematode as well that eats the larva, and what's it called? Does anybody remember the name of that one?
Would that stuff also work on rose weevils?
Yes. Oh, curculios.
Like the little red ones with the horns? Yeah.
Mm,
The red rose weevils with the little...
the ones that burrow into the buds. Yeah, they're curculio they're a weevil family. It would work on them if you could figure out where their larvae are living. So I'm not sure about that. Do they live in the ground?
I assume they would be under the trees are killing.
You would think so, but
You told me to use nematodes on rose curculio,
yeah,
and that worked.
it worked, eh? Okay. Yeah, so they just came out with this, it's a type of BT, if you know Bacillus thuringiensis is a type of bacteria that eats certain things, and they work great on mosquito larvae, it works great for caterpillars, and works great now for grubs. But yeah, the nematodes work as well.
I think it was May.
Well, the trick with the nematodes is it was very temperature sensitive, right? So we had to be careful because they're a semi-tropical organism, and it's a living organism, so that means in the fall, if it gets cold, they won't do much. And in the spring, if it's too cold or there's still frost in the ground, they don't do so good. So you have to delay your application based on soil temperature, and then it works very well. But not so much with this BT product because it's just a powder that you put on the ground, and it's sort of opportunistic. It'll sit there for weeks and not do anything till the larvae come around.
Is it too late to do the Grub Be Gone now?
I would still do it. Yeah, I would do it now. The reason is because the grubs, especially the weevils, are going to be living in the root system all winter, eating. I want to get some on there. So it's like a little granula, and like I did my peonies, I chopped them off, and then I just went sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle over the whole and all the way around the plant and in between the little bits. So I just kind of sprinkled it throughout.
Most of the nurseries have them.
You know where I found the best deal? Don't tell anybody. Was Home Hardware. They were cheaper than anywhere else because I was looking for it and I found it anywhere up to like you need a decent sized bag if you have a garden that's decent size. So you need the bigger bag. So it's usually it was like about $50 a bag at a bunch of places, and it was $37.50 at Home Depot. So I was like, convenient.
Have you ever found anything that works for wireworm?
Yeah, there should be something, but wireworm trapping is the key, but it's kind of tricky. But because that is a larva rather than a grub, so you have to do a little bit more research on that. Good question, though. Okay, so with heucheras, there's thousands and thousands and thousands. There's only one that I put on my list. So spice curls, because it's curly. It's got a rippled leaf that's kind of rippled. But you know, there's so many. I always say with heucheras is that if you want to try them, again, I have a few of them, and some people just have screaming success with them, and they're quite good. And other people, the deer eat them right away. Other people, the weevils eat them. So I just find it's a high risk plant for me. So I plant them if I have one, you know, but if I don't generally go out and search them out, and I don't usually put them into landscape designs because I need to have a higher percentage chance. My risk factor has to be low. And I just find anywhere there's pine trees around, you're going to get weevils, and there's lots of pines here. So just talking about lavenders now, and lavenders, as we know, like the old-fashioned ones like Hidcote and Munstead's the other one. Hidcote's a bit superior to Munstead. It's a darker color. Generally, really great plant. What it does is it'll bloom quite nicely. Hidcote's always been an average height of around 24 inches, somewhere in that range. And really beautiful color. It's a dark purple compared to the light lavender. Like if we said lavender color is much lighter than this. It's not dark purple, it's kind of a lighter purple. And that would be Munstead. So Munstead's your sort of standard English lavender, even though this is also what you'd say is an English lavender. I just wanted to note that the key important thing with lavenders is don't buy the seedling varieties. And seedling varieties are ones like Hidcote and Munstead. And the difference, like I've grown, I don't know, 200,000 of these because we've had perennial nurseries and we used to grow very popular. But when you grew them from seed, the one thing you noticed when you had, say, 4,000 plants in front of you and you just stood and stared at them, you would notice that they're all a little bit different. Some are tall, some are short, some bloom early, some bloom late. Some have wide leaves, some have narrow leaves. So the thing was that I noticed was that with lavenders is that they have the genetic variability in them, which can be good or not. The other genetic variability that happens in seedlings is some are hardy and some are not. So if I grew a long hedgerow of lavenders, like, oh, I want to have this go down my driveway, it's going to be so beautiful, my lavenders. And then you plant one of these varieties, and then you come back the next year, and there's 2 dead here, and 1 dead there, and 4 dead down there, and they're all hit. Some of them half dead. So what happens is that their hardiness varies. And you'll get a bunch of them that are just perfectly hardy, and they're like, oh, we're happy. So you can see is that when you go to a cutting variety, cutting varieties are going to be all consistent. So then if they're going to die, they all die. Right? Okay, maybe that's not the best way to say it. But what I found is actually most of the cutting varieties were actually hardier. They actually survived better. They were just survived cold better for some reason. And they didn't die back as much. And they were all consistent. So that was one thing I wanted to note, is that some of the newer varieties are all cuttings. It's the only way you can get consistency through a plant. So they might breed them back and forth and cross-pollinate and all this stuff to get a certain effect. And then they'll get that effect, and then they'll grow 1,000 of them and see which one's really good, you know, and they'll get, oh, these 3 are really good. And we'll give them different names, because this one's a little taller, so we'll call it Super Blue, and we'll call this one something else, and this one's something else. So then they've created these new varieties, and then they'll take those and do them by tissue culture or by cuttings, usually tissue culture now, and you'll get them all identical, genetically identical. And so, again, that's what I prefer. And the other thing is with the newer varieties, is they're getting to be more ever blooming. They're not sitting around half the year not blooming, where these older varieties, they tend to bloom when they bloom. Sometimes you get a secondary flush, but most times you don't. These are also extremely prone to seeding everywhere, especially inside themselves. And I was just saying how lavenders, they seed inside themselves, and those seedlings grow, and then you end up with this mixed, sometimes you even have white flowers, because they come white, pink, or blue from seed. And you'll get white ones shooting up inside your blue ones, and dark purple ones, and light colored, and light lavender, and all different, you know, it's like they're seedlings, of course. They're all genetically different. In nature, that's a good thing, because genetic variability means that some will live and some will die, depending on the conditions. And that's what nature is all about. But for us, we need some consistency. We're going to spend the big bucks.
So if you're purchasing one, other than the fact that it's a new variety, you don't really know whether it's a cutting or a seedling?
Well, usually you'll see a name on it. So there's a genera, which is lavender, and then there's a species, which would be like intermedia. That would be one of them, common ones. So lavender, intermedia, and then a name behind it in brackets. Super Blue, or, well, I'm going to cover a few here. Thumbelina is another one. So there's a bunch of different ones. And so
those are the seed?
those are cuttings.
Those are the cuttings.
Yeah, so if they have like a third name as part of it, chances are you're getting something that's better. Okay. And also just that craziness, like I was just out in the garden the other day, and their lavenders are just blooming away, and I was going like, that's so crazy, seeing lavenders in bloom in October. Like, thank you, whoever did this, whoever created those. So yeah, so when you have a lavender hedge, really important to have it not be seedlings. It should be all the same. Now, seedlings can still self-seed into themselves, and that tells you, well, maybe I need to deadhead more aggressively and a little earlier on these. If I want to maintain it, I don't want them seeding into themselves, because none of these are going to come true to seed. They're all going to be a mixture. So you hedge trim them, get the dead heads off, and then they flush and come back. The old ones, maybe they don't flush and come back. So lots of different sizes, lots of different colors, pure white and pink and light blue, dark blue, purple, tall, short, medium. All those things are available. So a couple that, like Blue Cushion's been around for quite a while. And Blue Cushion is actually this one. It's that really true blue color. And it's quite good. And you know, that one, I think I've had that one come true to seed, which is just something that tells you it must be some sort of a hybrid. I don't know. But it was just, you know, we realize these things sometimes also as we're talking, as I'm talking. Did this nice little planting. I needed it along the driveway. There's no irrigation there, really tough. There's a rock wall. It's the top of a rock wall, and then a concrete driveway, and it's really narrow. And I thought, well, let's just put in these Blue Cushion. So I put in the Blue Cushion all the way along, like about, I don't know, 65 plants. And then it went through last winter, right, which is brutal. Brutal, minus 33. And it was up on an exposed hill on the west side. It was a really tough spot. They all came through, and some of them self-seeded. And I said, well, here's just an experiment, right? Because I'm all about experimenting. But I told the client, I said, well, dig out those seedlings, because a couple of them had died. And I said, why don't you just pop them into those spots, because 2 or 3 died, and just see, you know, let them grow and see maybe they do come true, these ones. And sure enough, they stayed short, they were compact, same flower color. So that's unique, I think, to just Blue Cushion. Some of these other ones, Super Blue is just a great plant. It's just really strong blooming. Again, it's a cutting variety, really, really good. And there's actually lots of them. I like these super dwarf ones too. Thumbelina Lee, it's called. is a very nice dark purple one that stays really short, like about 12 inches. And I'm really loving these low plants you can use in front of a border, along a driveway or something, so you can drive over them, break them all up. Wee one is a very tiny one that stays very super compact. So it's the tiniest one so far that I've found. But you guys may, this is a cool thing about being a gardener, is you go from place to place, garden center to garden center, or garden to garden, and you will find things that not everybody has, something that's unique, a little bit different. So very, very cool. And again, all these are long blooming, almost ever blooming. So I'm liking that. So now on to some of the Nepitas. And Nepitas are interesting. And there's a Walker's variety of Nepita that's quite massive. It's huge. It's about 4 to 5 feet in diameter. And it gets quite tall, about 2 feet high. So then they came out with this one called Walker's Low, which was supposed to be a little bit lower. And it sure enough is about 22 inches high by still about 4 feet in diameter. It's quite big. But it's a strong bloomer. It's consistent flowers. And typical of some of these things, they do seed around a little bit. But if you want something that blooms spring till fall, you kind of put up with a little bit of seeding. And, we do hoeing and cleaning up and that sort of thing. So taking out the seedlings. But so Walker's is an older one. It's not my favorite, really. But I really like some of these new ones. And so you've heard about these, I'm sure. Cat's Pajamas. This is an example of this particular one, which these are actually just several of these dwarf varieties. They're just way stronger blooming, and they stay way smaller and more compact and easier to manage. I still get out with the hedge trimmer at the beginning of about the beginning of July, somewhere around there, and just take them right to the ground. Some of the Nepitas will shoot up depending on how high they go, and then they'll flop, and then you just trim them around the outside and get rid of those dead heads, and then let the center grow up, and it'll grow up and bloom again. And so you see them blooming at pretty much every month. I'm not sure I saw any blooming in October this year, but they bloom a lot. And but the newer varieties are definitely really good and worthwhile trying. So the way it goes, like these ones are, for me, the best. There's actually, there's 3 pictures and 4 names, and they're actually situated based on their size. So the top one is Persian blue, and this one is really good. It's going to be about 20 inches high by about 3 feet in diameter, in that range, and super strong blooming, like beautiful. And it's got really nice foliage. I really like that plant. It's going to be the biggest out of these 4. And then the next one down is going to be Cat's Pajamas. And Cat's Pajamas is a really good one. I like the name too. It's one that actually is got to be one of the strongest bloomers. And it stays super compact. It's only going to be about maybe 14 inches high, somewhere in that range, by about 24 inches in diameter. Not really very big. And it's good. And that's what I think that one is over there. Oh, no. This is a picture of Persian blue. And then this one is Cat's Pajamas. And this one is picture perfect. And it's Kitten Around I don't have a picture of. And Kitten Around is the next smallest one. So it's like small, smaller, smaller again. But Kitten Around, I don't have proof yet that thing is going to grow. Like some of the ones I've seen were pretty weak. And because it's a sort of a newer hybrid, I think it's been on the market now for about 3 years or something. But it's starting to, I don't know. I just don't have any actual proof that it's going to grow and do anything.
I've had it for several years.
Is it okay?
And I think it's growing into a cat. It's getting bigger.
It's growing into a cat. Cool. So that's really, that's the information we need for sure. Yeah. So it's supposed to be, smaller again than Cat's Pajamas, but it's kind of getting going. But I've seen a lot of failing ones, but I have a feeling they may be getting too much water because these things really don't need any water. They're durable once established. Picture Perfect is really quite good, and it's super low. It's only about 10 inches and just super compact. So that's something you could put along the edge of a, front of the border. But again, bloom, bloom, bloom. And this one has the largest flowers of any variety, which is interesting. Smallest with the biggest flowers. Can you beat that? I don't know. Deer.
About them is that the bees love them.
Bees, yeah, because it's a mint family, right? And some people are worried, like, oh, it's cat mint. It's like, yeah, well, all mints are cat mints. But nice flowers. I saw a planting, and I took a picture of it. It was on Bonjour Road out in south, towards Mission there. And it was just so beautiful. I couldn't believe it. And I'm pretty sure that was a Persian blue, like it was like that. It was all the way across the front of their property. I had to take a picture. It was a photo op. It was like, you can't drive by that. You got to take a picture. So I took a couple shots, and it's still, I look at the pictures and I just go, wow, that's amazing. So I just put peonies in here, not because there's new ones. I just can't do any talks without talking about peonies. They're beautiful. So again, we were talking about how the weevils get in and eat the roots because they have those big fleshy roots. Lots of things like to eat that, right? Maybe even pocket gophers, that sort of thing. So just had to throw pictures of peonies. My all-time favorite, I think, is the most decadent cut flower that there ever was. So I love it. The Perovskias, this little spire has been around for a while, and little spire is okay. It has its moments. Sometimes it gets a little weak inside, but it's still good because it's not as big and aggressive as the regular Perovskias, the Russian sage. So it's better for sure. Just not 100% sold on it. I think that by the time you hit the summer, it blooms quite early. So by the time you hit summer, it's kind of finished off, and you just get these white stems, and it's almost like you deadhead it, right? But because it's so drought tolerant, it's amazing. But some of these other ones might be a little different.
I just wonder if you have concerns. I was talking to Lisa Scott of Oasis
Yep.
about the invasive potential of these. Do you?
I don't think so. I think we shouldn't water them.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, because like in my house, I've had the regular one, which is it suckers underground, right? And you get seedlings too. The dwarf ones are way more tame, and I don't think they seed nearly as much either. So I don't think I'd be worried about it. But I tell that to everybody: is plant them, don't water them. Like water them when you first plant them, but get back off on the water because they are way nicer, more compact, easier to grow in dry conditions, and they stay put and they don't get out of hand. So this brings into mind sort of what they call hydrozoning. And hydrozoning is just where you really group your plants together by their water requirements. And so don't put this one in with plants that need a lot of water, right? Because none of the Russian sages are going to do very well in wet conditions. And they just completely die over winter if they're wet. And it's not a hardiness thing at all. If the roots get wet in the winter, if they're in a low boggy spot, they just die. So they're not tolerant of wet feet. So Sage Advice is a newer one, and it looks pretty good. It's got like double or triple the amount of shoots in it, so it's nice and thick. And then Denim and Lace has been out for a couple seasons, and I've really yet to prove that one, but I like the foliage on it, and I like the way it blooms so far. I used about, I don't know how many on one property, but quite a few, I think about 10 of them on one property. So next year I'll have a report because I think it'll be all right.
Excuse me. The little spire, what was the maximum height?
It's going to be about 24 inches. Yeah, so, and there's some other ones that are there's another one, the name eludes me, but it's a little taller than that. But regular Russian sage, remember again, do not water it because that can be very aggressive, and it can be also floppy. If it's planted in the shade, it just, hot, dry conditions, it stays upright, stays compact, doesn't spread so much. But mine at home, I haven't watered it for years, and it's okay. It's still spreading by roots. I don't know how the roots push through that dry soil. It's like dry, silty clay, and it just pushes through and shoots up. So as part of maintenance on Russian sages, you always pull up the suckers, That's a normal maintenance thing. So you go find your plant, go around the perimeter, anything growing out, just grab it and pull it up, and they're all runners back to the main plant. Then once you get them all pulled up, snip them all off, get rid of those, let the plant grow, watch for seedlings, just like with lavender and other things. Just get rid of the seedlings. So Rudbeckia goldsturm is the old-fashioned Gloriosa daisy, and goldsturm is one of the better plants for sure, but it has its good years and its bad years. I thought this year was a good year for mine. They did really well. But the newer varieties are just superior, again, better, lower, more bloomy. So Little Gold Star is one that's a really good one. And it's shorter. Like there's a couple other ones, Little Rocket. There's a couple other dwarf ones, and they bloom like a little splash of bloom, and then they're done. And then see, you get a really good show for a bit, and they're really tiny, about 10 inches high. So I kind of like that. But this Little Gold Star is a little bit better than that. It's a little taller. It's got a little more vigor. So this one's sort of in that 12-inch to maybe as high as 14 inches or so. American Gold Rush was perennial of the year like 2 years ago, I think. So it's really proven to be a strong bloomer, and blooming a little earlier and blooming a little later in the gardens. So, and more flower heads per square inch too. So it's a good one, and it's going to be up at that 22-inch height sort of thing. So slightly shorter than the goldsturm. So I like that one. Salvias, salvias, this is one category where I think it's really going to explode. It's starting to explode right now, but they've definitely solved the breeding aspect of it, so they're able to really get a wide variety. And May Night is one of the first ones that came out that was actually a good rebloomer. It bloom all year if you just would deadhead it. There's several different ways to treat it. If whenever I have a planting, if I have a planting that's a mass planting, so I might say have 30 May Nights. So then I go in and I'll take one of them and I'll just deadhead the very tops of it. The next one I'll deadhead, removing branches and a little bit more intense. And then the third one, I cut it right to the ground. And then I'll just keep repeating that program. So one light, one medium, and one heavy pruning. And I just do that till the whole planting. And then what happens is it always looks beautiful. The ones that I just lightly pruned, they keep on blooming. The ones that I pruned medium, they come on fairly quickly within a week or two, and they're really blooming good again. The ones I cut to the ground are just like little bushes pushing up, and the buds are starting to form. So what I'm doing is I'm just thinking ahead to try to get the maximum bloom potential out of those, and consistent, like from spring till fall. It's not always possible because we tend to mix up our plantings quite a bit. So it's sort of normal because everybody wants spring, summer, fall blooming. So you're going to mix up your plantings. But in this case, that's how I would do it. These guys are also, they can be prone to some insect issues, especially I find the earwigs get into them and they just skeletonize the leaves quite a bit. And marmots will eat these as well. So they smell horrible, like the foliage. How can they eat that? But they seem to like it. Probably because it's mint family. So typical of mints, the bees go crazy for these things. They're on them steady. So I like the Bumble series. They're small and they're pretty strong bloomers. They're not as strong a bloomer as that May Night, but they're small and compact, and they come in an assortment of colors. So you can get this. Actually, I'm just going to see if I have a picture with the names on them. I do. There's none on this one, yeah. But these are the Bumble series. So they're just showing you how short and stocky they are and how nice they are. Bumbleberry, I think, is the one in the middle. Bumble Snow, just throw Bumble in front of whatever name you want. After a while, when you start looking at these, you just think of these people, they have to sit and rack their brains. What are we going to call this one? It's like, I don't know, let's write it on a dice and roll it. See which one pops up. There's a lot of different names, but I kind of like that name. And it kind of, to me, it sounds more compact. Like, I don't know, it just sort of sounds good. So with smaller, you also get bigger, right? So the Bumbleberry is going to be a smaller one. Azure Snow is a blue, light blue one. I really love that color. Light blue, like, it's beautiful in the garden. But you just don't have one, have 5. You know? Ballerina pink is a beauty. It's such a clear, beautiful pink color. And then this is a big one. Look at it, it's waist high, so 30 inches high. Big, aggressive, beefy plant. Big Sky, it's called. Nice blue, deep blue, almost purple. So this is the one I want to get out of this picture. Like, I've had some of these other ones, and they're good. But I want this one. I just think it's going to be great, you know. And again, don't plant 1. Plant 3, 6, 7, 8, 10. Go big or go home. And reblooming, all these things will rebloom. The bumbleberry ones, the dwarfer ones, are not quite as good, but still not bad. So I like these. And again, these are deer resistant and drought tolerant. I know the salvias, we grew those in concrete. So literally the seedlings would grow in the cracks in the concrete, and they would just grow and be beautiful, beautiful plants. Not watering it or anything. It's like, how do they live there? So yeah, so you know, if you want tough plants, these guys are going to be tough. You will get some seeding around.
Are these varieties supposed to be government-resisting earwigs?
No. No, probably not, but you might have to try and see. Earwigs are sort of a problem of our dry climate, and they're not as much of a problem in other climates. So if you have earwigs, you take earwig management techniques. And remember, they're crawling insects. You use diatomaceous earth, which is the powder, right? So in my vegetable garden, I always powder the surface of the soil, and then I put my insect net over to keep the insects from flying in. But all the crawlers, like the earwigs and the sow bugs and all those things, they walk through that diatomaceous earth, and that's it. It kills them. So I would do the same with these. It's just the white powder. You know, it's an inert substance. It's actually, you know, it's fossilized diatoms. So cool. Some other ones, some other new ones. Moulin Rouge, I have a client that planted about 10 of these. So they were okay this year, but they're going to be really good next year. So I just like that rich pink tone. The Pink Dawn, which again was one that was good because dark foliage with the lighter pink, but yet black stems. So light, or that nice, it's a clear pink, I would call that, on blackish stems. Looks really good. And then Violet Riot is kind of cool. Deepest, darkest purple. So I think we're going to see a real explosion of these on the marketplace, right? It's going to just, things are going to go, they're going to go a little nutty here in the future. Delosperma, the only reason I bring this up is because this is the perennial ice plant, is that, I don't know, I see them surviving. Like, they didn't survive for years and years and years, and I was like, I'm never going to plant those. And then I go out to someone's house and I said, well, did you just plant these? And they're like, no, they've been there for years. And I'm like, what? Okay, interesting. And I know there's a couple, at least Delosperma cooperi, at the H2O garden, non-H2O garden. And they've been there for a while, haven't they, Seagree, you think? Or are
We
they?
used to consider them annual, like 10 years ago, when I started with Moxa, but they have been reliably perennial minus last year.
Right. Oh, they died out even last year?
But quite a few of them did, yeah.
I would imagine if you had 2 feet of snow, they might do better. I don't know. Some of these dry-loving plants, though, don't like to be wet under the snow either. So. Lots of new, those were all new colors. That's kind of nice. Sedums, there's always so many sedums. And this one, they call it Mocha Magic. And it's not because of the color while it's in full bloom, but it's the finishing at the end of the season. The whole plant turns this kind of mocha color, coffee color. And so it's just kind of an interesting late season plant. Purplish foliage, and actually really beautiful sort of tones of blues and purples mixed for the foliage color. So I like that. Again, sedums will get eaten by deer, yeah. Yeah, typical of sedums, and not as drought tolerant as you would think. Like they can be. I think the low matty ones are really good. Like I killed a bunch of sedum autumn joys by not watering them.
Really?
Yeah, killed them dead.
If they've been planted in the last, say, 2 years or so, and they're really
Yeah,
Can that be a light exposure
that's
issue?
moisture issue, and it needs hot sun. So hot sun, yeah, hot sun and pull back on the water whenever you get those flopping plants. So it could be a location or it could be just, and sometimes too much food. Like they like to be barren conditions and they stay more compact. So barberries, oh my God. There are so many barberries, but not enough, I would say. They can't be enough barberries. And these ones are not that they're super, super new. They're just good. A lot of them are really good. So it's hard to have any discussion about plants without talking about barberries. Again, talking about foliage color, like they're great. They have just a ton of different colors. And so in the landscape, they have that value. And then when they do flower, they get the little yellow bellflowers, and then they get little orange berries or little red berries, which are edible, of course, but if you want to go and pick them, good luck. Oh yeah, yeah.
Is that very thorny?
Extremely thorny, yeah. Yeah.
You have to fight the birds off them anyhow.
Yeah. The birds love them, yeah. They're very nutritious. They're full of berberine, which is now, they're starting to sell that. You can buy berberine as a supplement. It's something special, I don't know. But yeah, so cool plants because of their different colors and textures and habits. So many of them are tall and arching. Some are very large. The first barberry I ever saw, this was before they had any of these Japanese barberries, was Berberis juliani, which was a tall one, about 10 feet tall, with large arcing stems and thorns that were like this long. And we used to think, oh, that's perfect for keeping people out of your yard. You know, put that along the fence, and anybody who survives it deserves to break in. But yeah, so lots of different things. And I like these ascending growing ones. They're calling them more like pillar forms. And the pillar forms are really quite nice. There's basically a bunch of pillar forms. So the Hellman pillar, red pillar, which is a really dark color, nice upright habit. The Sunjoy orange pillar and Sunjoy gold pillar. Now these ones, as far as I know, you can't buy them here yet. Fingers crossed we get them this year. So that's why, even though these have been around for a few years, I think it's just been, they have a hard time bulking up on them and getting enough of them. And then growers in Canada have to pick up the pace and get on these things. Because I love plants that will give you the effect that they want without overcrowding. You know, you can throw in a pillar plant anywhere. Just throw one in, like, I just need a little splash of yellow. Okay, well, a pillar barberry, why not? And I really like this orangey one. Like, that's such a beauty. So that's my number one in that picture. But then at the bottom, of course, Gold Nugget and Concord, which I feel are the best two barberries, because we do have this issue where plants just get too big. And these guys will stay nice and small. I've got Gold Nuggets that have been in for 7 or 8 years, and they're about 3 foot diameter by about a little more than a foot high, for 7 years. That's pretty good. The Concords get slightly higher, but not quite as spready, but deep purple. So, it's just great to have those kind of color combinations. Yeah.
Barberry is it on the invasive list? What is the invasiveness of some of the newer
Not in this climate. They're not invasive, but there's some possibility. Like, I don't even know if I've ever seen. Oh yeah, I've seen some seedlings, come to think of it, occasionally, but they don't spread by roots, and they don't. They're kind of hard to get a seed to grow. So for us, that doesn't mean that in other climates they can't go nuts. The burning bush, like Euonymus alata compacta, is incredibly invasive in places all over North America where they're illegal to grow them, right? But we grow tons of them. Butterfly bush, right? Fabulous plants for us, but they're not non-invasive here because it's hard to get the seedlings to grow. You can get one, but you got to really watch for them to find one. And some varieties will seed a bit better than others. But if you go down to Vancouver, like I went salmon fishing this fall, and we were way out in the boonies up this river, and the river banks all the way up the river were just butterfly bushes all the way. And we're out in the middle of nowhere, like, where the heck did those come from? All the way up the river, both sides. Like, I was like, these are super invasive in this climate. But of course, in our climate here, it's too cold in the wintertime, the seeds die out, they freeze and die. But in California, don't even say butterfly bush down there, because out come the guns. Yeah, so barberry's really great. I don't know much about any issues with those. Hibiscus, as we know, they're not as new, but there are some really good ones. And it's like with anything, they're getting better and better as they go along. They're kind of weeding out some that are stronger and some that are weaker. And they're getting better. So there's pillar forms, dwarf forms that stay down below 3 feet or so, which is kind of nice. Like I always say, I like the Hibiscus syracus, Rose of Sharon, and I always would describe to people as just, plant the plant and walk away. Do not prune it, right? It doesn't need pruning. The thing grows like a perfect teardrop shape, just perfect teardrop shape if never pruned. And so that means a width of maybe 5 or 6 feet, but a full 10, 12 feet high. Like, that's beautiful. But see, as long as I know that and I put it somewhere where it can just do its thing, I'd never have to trim the thing. And the less I trim it, the more it keeps its natural form. Remember I say, whenever I plant a plant, I'm always thinking form. Well, the newer ones, like the pillar forms, are very narrow and they're fairly high, maybe 6, 7 feet or so, but fairly narrow. They'll still get decent size, but and their blooming is just slightly different. It's not quite as strong as the old-fashioned ones, but still pretty good. And I like the colors. It's just kind of nice to get a different blast of color. The pure white is nice, and these are all sort of colors that you can get now, I think, in the pillar form, which, like Red Heart is this one with the red center, which is really good in the regular version, but they also have it, I think it's more like this color more commonly in the pillar form. So, kind of nice. So, yeah, let's see if that'll change channels. What? Suddenly it's not going to change for me. Let's see if I do it manually. There we go. Isn't that funny, eh? Push the button every time, works perfect, and all of a sudden stops. Sorry, that button no longer works. Thank you, computers. Anyway. So some pillar form ones here. So people like to use, the hibiscus for a hedge. Deer resistance on this is variable at best. I don't really find them super deer resistant. That's why I used to like growing the really big ones, because the deer would just eat them up to here, and then the top would still bloom. Whereas these smaller ones, I don't think they have a hope. But anyway, good to know. So the pillar form and the Moschutos varieties. Is this one Moschutos? No. I think this is still one of the little Kim varieties. There's a whole series of these small bush ones that are very bush-like with fairly good-sized single blooms. And typical of these hibiscus, right, single flowers are big and the doubles are small. Just sort of the way it goes. Doesn't mean they're any less nice. Look at that, eh? Maybe it's all going to just come to an end. So Moschutos are the herbaceous hibiscus, which are pretty good in this climate. Even the minus 33, they survived at my house. And I'm in a bad spot, really. So years ago, we would just tell people, don't bother considering them as perennials, because some of these get the big dinner plate size flowers, and really lovely. This one's a new one. It's called Cookies and Cream. So it's got the dark purplish foliage with the white flowers. I really like that. But they are pretty durable, like poor soils, not much water, still are fine. They're really a late summer interest, so they kind of get going in August, September. And the one on the other side is called Little Legends Pink. So Little Legends is a whole series of little dwarf ones, which are I think they're just going to be starting to come onto the market. Hopefully, fingers crossed, fairly soon. But these are really small, 30, 36-inch range, which is really nice. I like small plants because, people like the attributes of these things, but they're often way too big for most gardens. People just don't have the room for them, especially in the stratas. But, man, stratas struggle, eh?
Depends on the strata.
Yeah, it does.
How restrictive they are.
Yeah, exactly. And what we've done is, like, I've been involved in stratas to say, like, they go, oh, we're not sure what's going on. I go, I know what's going on. The plants are way too big. You know, they have these plants that grow 10 to 12 feet in diameter and they're a foot off of the sidewalk. And you're just going like, just dig it out. Stop hedge trimming it, for God's sakes. Like, what's wrong with you people? Get it out. So then just put a little plant, so these little white Weigelias or a little barberry, and you put it in there, it'll be just fine, or a little perennial.
A couple of little snowberries that just get pretty too.
Snowberries?
Yeah.
Like, oh, the little ones, yeah. Cephalocarpus, I don't think it's Cephalocarpus. Yeah, bayberry.
They're covered in berries.
Yeah, really pretty. Oh, I heard him.
Back to Rose of Sharon, did you experience a lot of winter kill?
Yes. Yeah, lots of them died out last year. Some were completely dead, some of them were partially dead. I had one that, because the last 2 winters were pretty brutal, that the winter before I had a big one that died completely, and then I had a medium-sized one, about this big, and it died 3/4, and then, but last year it killed it off. So the 2 winters in a row were enough to do it in. And but I did have one that was exposed, and then I went in the backyard, and I have one, the same one as I had in the front, and it's just more protected there, and it came through okay. I had to cut some dead wood out, but it wasn't too bad.
I had to cut mine right down.
Yeah.
And it's been there for about 30 years. And never got around to digging out the root system.
And it grew back.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Mine too.
Yeah, all mine, I've never dug them out yet, but I'm still waiting. Like, come on, come back. I always give them a fair kick at it, right? So yeah, hydrangeas, we're going to get into the hydrangea world, and this is, again, one of these categories. Probably the biggest selling plant, you know, is hydrangeas. So the category, anytime they can come up with something new, they will. And it's not as easy to hybridize as other ones, but it's still a good option. The Annabelle is one of these original ones that they've had for years and years and years. Has a really good drought tolerance, actually. Blooms on all new growth, doesn't matter. Tendency to flop when it rains. Needs to be staked up a little bit like a peony. Needs a bit of a framework to hold the flowers up off the ground a bit. And but the deer do eat it for sure. All the Annabelles, they just get chomped. So it's one of these things, when I see it, I go like, that's beautiful. There's no deer here, I can tell. It looks great. But the newer ones, what is going on with this thing? Uh-oh. Delay. Don't click again. Don't you click. Okay. Invincible. So Invincible is like a hybrid from the Annabelle. These are new and improved. You can just see way more blooms, and the blooms are more ball-shaped instead of flat more. So they're still they're sort of arborescens type, but beautiful. They call them smooth hydrangeas, and you can tell because if you touch the leaf, it's very rough. How does that work? What's wrong with these people? Who's named that smooth hydrangea? Their leaves are like sandpaper. But anyway, yeah, the deer will eat them, but they certainly put on a show. And if you can get a bunch in a row, man, they're unreal. But these guys are big and beefy, and they attack. They grow big, fast, easy to grow. Very few pests other than the deer. And quite durable, drought tolerant. I have one that I rarely even water it, and it's fine. The one that I don't give any water to, it stays quite small. It just stays about this big, whereas they can get quite big. But really pretty, and what I like about them is they come on in the spring, and they come on this really, really bright white color, and they're really great white through the early part of the season. Then when they get into summer, they start to green up a bit, and they start to turn green. And then when they go into the fall, they'll turn this really nice rich brown color when they're finished. And I still like that. I like to have, anytime I see plants in the garden, I want to see something of interest. And I don't care if it's dead flowers or dead heads. I like dead heads, especially these when they're this big. They're brown, but they look cool. Super good texture for the garden. And so just remembering that hydrangeas, each individual flower are bracts. So they're modified leaves. And in this very center of each of those little flowers on there is the actual flower. So it's funny, that's just typical of hydrangeas. Many little leaves that, again, are supposed to direct the bees, but I don't think bees really go at these guys too much. But out of this group, if I can get it to register, there we go. So this is, again, these are arborescens variety. So they come in pink. There's a bunch of different ones. Invincible Spirit is a good one. And it's pretty good. You know, when these ones, they came out with 2 or 3 pink Annabelles, and they were kind of weak and really wispy, and I just found they were not really reliable as much. But it seems like after a few years, they kind of sturdy up, and they seem to be getting okay, seem to be better. So I know in Lake Country, they have them planted right at the municipal office. They have some there, and they look pretty good. They've been there for about maybe 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years. The other varieties, Wee White is one that was, when it first came out, was very disappointing. Like, it just didn't have any aggressiveness. It couldn't survive hardly. So we tried a bunch of them in different areas, and they all would just die out, and not sure what was going on. But then the next year, the stock that came in was far better and stronger, and now they seem to be doing quite well. But how nice is it to have a pom-pom type, Annabelle type smooth hydrangea that's only 2 feet high? Like, really cool. That's a useful plant in the landscape. And again, you know, you go to some of these properties and they have all these huge plants growing everywhere. Get some dwarfs in there. It's much easier to manage them. And then Limetta is another one that's part of the same group. And it's got a little bit more of a fuzzy flower. The flowers are very tiny. And I actually really like it. But we planted a bunch of those this year, and they were pretty durable. Deer also eat those. So depending, you have to be a little particular where you plant any of these guys, that's for sure. And so other varieties, the sun is not helping us today. The Serrata group, which are called mountain hydrangeas. So mountain hydrangeas are good because they are supposed to be deer resistant. But we have to send them to Mary's house to see if that's actually true or not, because her deer are of a different breed. They're shrub eaters for sure. But oh yes, yes, cougars would be awesome. So there's a bunch of different ones, and I think there's going to be more and more of these coming out. There are some really good ones. Twist and Shout, these ones, they're called lace caps. So that's where the flower is so big, and then inside is all these little tiny, tiny actual flowers, and then around the perimeter are these big actual bracts. So again, it's
They're beautiful, but I find that they're more susceptible. I have one, and out of all of my hydrangeas, it's the one that deals with winter kill the most.
oh yeah. Yeah, I had mine for quite a few years. It seemed to be okay, but I didn't give it any water, so it was very small. It wouldn't grow bigger than this, whereas the one I had, though, is Bluebird, and oh, that's Bluebird up in the corner. Bluebird is one of the more free-flowering ones. It's been pretty successful. This one is a dwarf form now, a newer one, and it tends to be blue or pink, depending on the soil conditions. And a newer one called Dynamo that's supposed to be good. And the Let's Dance Lovable is Let's Dance is a cross between Macrophyllus and Serratas. So Serrata is a mountain hydrangea, and I think that's why they're more deer resistant, is because they are a higher elevation where there would be deer in nature, rather than some of the lower elevation ones. So, but question?
Do you think that you should be trying to acidify the soil of a hydrangea?
No, they're just going to be pink. If you want them to be blue,
Well, I
you
wasn't thinking of trying to force a color. I just
they don't need a.
thought that hydrangea likes more of an acidic soil.
No, they're okay. They do prefer, like in different types, like the Annabelle doesn't care about the soil.
No.
PG types, they don't care about soil. These ones that have the bigger leaves, like Macrophyllus, they have to have beautiful, deep, moist garden soil to be successful. These ones are also a little bit of a moisture. They would rather have a bit of moisture and better soils. They perform better. But This one interesting, like, well, Bluebird up in Vernon, we had a client up there, and we built this beautiful garden for them right at their entranceway, and it was all hydrangeas and all different types you can imagine, but they were all macrophylla types except for this one. And this one was the biggest one out of all. It was about 5 feet in diameter, and we never had a problem there. And there was like big bluebird with all these different, Nico Blue is one I used to really like because it would reliably bloom every year. All different types of these mop head type macrophyllas all the way around the house. It's just gorgeous, and every year it was fabulous for 5 years. And then one day the deer came in. A whole herd came in and ate every single hydrangea literally to the ground except for Bluebird. They ate all the way around it and wouldn't touch it. And I was just going like, that's deer resistant. Because all the ones around it were eaten and that one was left pristine. And it's like, well, isn't that interesting? But yeah, and that was, okay, time to change something different. But that was because of a subdivision that moved in, and it was out on the, does anybody know where Tronson Road is in Vernon? Yeah, out that way, lots of deer. Well, now they're channeling as they built that big golf course. Now the deer come right down there. Anyway, so yeah, serratas are good. I just wish the garden centers would stock them more readily because they are not commonly stocked. Some places they don't stock them at all. Don't know why. Maybe I haven't talked to them yet. Guys have to stock this one. So hydrangea quercifolia, the oak leaf hydrangea. This is the coarse plant, so coarse texture in the garden. And also brilliant red fall colors, like brilliant red. And a very, very prominent, strong plant. These are dwarf forms. Munchkin oak leaf. I like this one, Little Annie oak leaf. Kind of like that one. Ruby slippers. Well, now there's a whole bunch coming out, and you're going to find little tiny ones that stay small and medium and large, all different types. The old-fashioned hydrangea quercifolia is quite a big plant. It's wider than it is tall. So if you get that 5 to 6 feet high, it's sort of typical, but the diameter can be 8 feet or even more. But the leaves on them are sometimes humongous, like huge leaves. So I love the coarse texture of a plant like that. And then they bloom pretty much all summer, but pretty durable too. And the deer resistance is not much better than some of the other ones. The deer will eat them, and their drought tolerance is okay. I have had some places where I saw them grow for years and years with not very much water, like once a week sort of thing, and they seem to do fine. But each one is different. You try different varieties and see which one's better than the other ones. And this is getting a little bit annoying, actually. So one of my favorites is Bobo. This is a PG type. So now we're going into Paniculata grandifloras. Paniculata grandifloras are really great, but they are massively blooming, quite drought tolerant, and the deer will nibble them from time to time. I've been in places where the deer are plentiful and they're everywhere, but they're not eating these. And I'm going like, did you guys forget to eat these or what? Because they look really good. I don't understand the deer relationship because I've had them in properties and they got eaten. Like out in Carr's Landing, they would get eaten out there. But then out in South Kelowna, not so much. I'm going a little bit over time. Is everybody okay?
Oh, yeah.
You're okay, just for a little bit more? I only have a few slides left
So
here.
can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What's the experience of all those you've discussed so far, the hydrangeas that could tolerate warm wind
Wind?
exposures? Any concerns on that?
Could be. Big flowered plants are not that good in wind, right? Because they're going to take a beating. So you can try different ones, but smaller ones are going to be better. Like Bobo is pretty good. Like I've got some Bobos that are just stay super small, that stay compact. They're at the shop. There's a couple Bobos there, and they're so great. They just stay small. It's like a ball of flowers. It's like, whoa, that's awesome. And just durable. But there's lots of them and lots of different ones. Now they add this worm. They add a word, prime and punch. So those are, you know, they're newer varieties. So we know Pinky Winky's been around for a long time. It's about 6, 7 feet high, quite a big beast with these big blooms. Remember that you control the size of the flower on Paniculata grandiflora types, so PG hydrangeas, by how hard you cut them. So the harder you cut them to the ground, the bigger the flowers come. The less you prune them, the smaller the flowers get. So I have some varieties in some properties that we just kind of trim the flowers off every year, and the blooms are very tiny. But you get the exact same plant. Like if I want to rejuvenate, cut it right down to about 1 foot high, let that thing come back, and you'll see the blooms will be massive. So the problem with massive blooms is they flop. so that's the other thing, is if I have a windy location, right? If I have windy locations, which I do have some in windy locations, these paniculatas, and that's why we didn't trim them very hard. We just take the dead heads off. And the flowers get really tiny, but you get tons of them, but they're literally only that big. Whereas some of these varieties, some of the blooms are like this big, like massive. Like if you cut them hard, they come back really strong. So yeah, this sun's not working for me too good. So Little Lime Punch is a good one. It's actually got really great colors, really nice tones. It tends to have multiple colors on the same plant. And this is what it looks like early in the season. So remember that with paniculatas, they start out white and then they change to their pinkish tones a little bit later. Quickfire is an older variety, but this is Quickfire Fab. And there's a little Quickfire and a bunch of different ones that are really nice. There's now a new one called Tiny Quickfire. It stays really small, like about 24, 30 inches in diameter. Like it's pretty cool to get plants like that. Like to me, it's like, finally, we have some plants. Limelight Prime now, which is a new Limelight, and it's, did I mention that one already? No, Limelight Prime, yeah, here. So this is what it looks like in the early season, and then as it gets darker in the late season, I mean, end of the season, it ripens right up to that sort of pink with a white tip on the flower. And Firelight is a new one, it's just solid pink pretty much in the late season. So again, starting white, ending pink. I don't know why these are so macrophyllus, there's a few nice macrophyllus. These wee bit ones, I'm still trying to figure out if they're going to survive or not. But I like the wee bit ones because they're really tiny. They're going to give you a full mop head type hydrangea. They are the water-loving ones, so they're like typical macrophyllus. Part shade is good. It'll handle some sun, but they stay really short and really small. So if you had to go along the front of a border or something, you want something for July and August, that would be a good one. And so the varieties wee bit giddy, wee bit grumpy, and wee bit innocent. And I really like the wee bit innocent as a light pink. It's really quite nice and very floriferous. You get a lot of flowers on those ones. So, but again, this one I would say is unproven here. And also, remember that the colors are affected by the soil pH. So it's actually aluminum uptake that affects the flower colors. It only works on macrophylla varieties. So with macrophyllas, typically when they absorb a lot of aluminum into the plant, it turns the flowers blue. But aluminum is only available in an acid environment. It's got to be acidic soils. So our soils here are very alkaline, so you don't usually get blue flowers very often. But if you wanted to try, you can use aluminum sulfate, which gives you sulfate, which is sulfuric acid, right? Sulfate, and aluminum in the same package, and it works instantly. So that means when you put it on, you'll be starting with a high pH soil, and as fast as you pour it into the soil, it's already acidic. Like it works right away. If you take sulfur pellets, and sprinkle it around, that can take up to about 5 months to actually start to dissolve and change the soil pH. So just as a heads up, if you want acid soil, use aluminum sulfate, but you do have to reapply. And some people even say put it on in the fall so the plant can absorb all that aluminum, and then hit it again in the spring, and then you can get your blue flowers that year. But for us, only in our alkaline conditions in the Okanagan. So the Physocarpus opulus, this is the 9 barks, right? The old-fashioned golden 9 bark is too big for most gardens, but we do find it in a lot of gardens in little tiny areas and this big giant shrub. And they usually end up as a ball shape because that's how you can tell they're in the wrong spot. These guys, this is Diablo. This one's getting a bit of an old one too. But the key with Diablos, don't water them because they don't like water. Water tends to stimulate the mildew problems. Grows too lush and soft and the disease gets in too easy. So we want to grow them in tough, poor, hot, sunny conditions and then never prune them is really key. Only selective removal of dead or old stems and always let the new stems grow back. And if you let them bloom, if you let them grow all their old stems every year, you'll always get lots of flowers. And the flowers are beautiful on the purple foliage. And then after they bloom, the little flower buds turn red, like a ruby red color, and they're really quite nice. So it's, I would say, a pretty good one. A newer one is called Calico Kitty 9-bark, and it has tiny, tiny little leaves, and it stays small, and it could be a good one. I don't know. I would say it's worth a try. It's got a kind of a nice wine purple foliage, and a very drought tolerant, tough like the rest of them. A good plant. Boxwoods, I just talk about boxwoods because it's been an annoying year for boxwoods because people are always coming up with it, like people just make stuff up, about what's wrong with them and everything. And I get all these calls, I just talked to my landscaper guy and he says my boxwoods are too dry and they're all turning brown. And then someone else, I got boxwood blight. My boxwoods have boxwood blight, so I gotta rip them all out. And I say, well, can I go look at them first? The biggest problem with boxwoods is the leaf miner. And that's what we see, it's causing all the browning out of these things. So it's very simple to learn about boxwood leaf miner and then just deal with that. So there's a seasonality to it. There's times when you have to prune it hard in the springtime. The insect overwinters in the leaf itself. So you can go in the middle of winter and find a boxwood leaf and it's starting to turn brown or it looks discolored or bumpy. And then you kind of peel it apart. And the epidermis is the top of the leaf, and then the bottom leaf is there, and that's where the grub lives, is between the two layers. That's why they call it a leaf miner, because it's mining out inside the leaf. But they overwinter in the leaf, and then about beginning of May, they drop to the ground, and then they pupate and fly as a little fly and lay eggs everywhere again. So we use that to our power to control them. So we go out early, like in early April, and give them a hard pruning, like take off 3 or 4 inches off of them. Even I did some where I took them right down to nothing, like down to stubs. And I'm talking, these were like this high, and they were so infested. By the end of March, I said, we got to get these out of here now. So cut them all down to about 10 inches high, just a stump with a few little brown twigs on it, no leaves. And they all came back beautifully, and they were fine, and they're happy, no problems. So a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. So other ones we're trying a lot of are the columnar boxwoods. There's a few different varieties. These things do tend to freeze out a little bit from time to time, but depending where they are, I just love them. So this one is an actual English boxwood. All the other boxwoods we grow here are Korean boxwoods, and Korean boxwoods don't get the blight. So that's one thing when somebody says, your boxwood's got blight, boxwood blight. It's a big deal. It's like, yeah, it's all over in places where they have English boxwoods, but not Korean boxwoods. That's the other reason I know it's leaf miner. but these are all English boxwoods, and they are columnar. And, we were buying in 8-footers that were about this big around, just like a pencil. And they were beautiful. The price of those has gone outrageous, because I was buying those like 6 to 8 footers for about $250 a piece or something, which I thought was pretty good for such a plant that was already 15 years old or whatever it was. I thought that was a good price. Very narrow, just like that, like a pencil. But really nice to put that on the corner of a building, or, there's lots of uses for something columnar like that. And completely deer resistant, like deer just don't eat boxwoods. And they're quite drought tolerant too. But these guys are a full zone 5, almost zone 6. So what we find is in exposed areas, they just get burned off by the cold wind. When you hit -30, they're going to suffer. They don't usually die, They just look like they're dying. So I say don't give up, and we use mostly. I've used the Graham Blandy. The Arctic Emerald is one it has light green shoots on a dark green foliage, and then Emerald Tower, which is just a green, straight green color. So I like all of them. I'm going to keep continuing to try them and use them. The deer resistance factor is just too much to resist. I just love that part of it. And so we're just going to move on to trees, and we're getting close here. With trees, there's some trees are better than others. There's not a lot to look at. The Venus dogwood's been out for a few years, but it's got the biggest, beautiful flower of any flowering dogwood. Remember, the deer do eat these, and if they don't eat them, they'll rasp them with their antlers and try to kill them because they can. These guys, look at the size of those blooms. It's the biggest flower of any dogwood. So they said 6 inches in diameter is about how big they get. Some of them are maybe a bit bigger, but they're just a very decadent plant. And these are zone 5, zone 4, zone 5. So the hardiness is fine. They just need good soil. So if I was going to plant a dogwood like these, I'd just make sure I'd build a nice berm with decent soil and plant it in there. Make sure it's nice and shallow, so that the roots are right on the surface, just like all trees. And you have good success with that one. But the deer, unfortunately, it's a dogwood. So dogwoods, again, are a native shrub, so they're really prone to deer munching. A new one called Raging Red. And it's super dark purple. If anybody likes that one. Cercis, a double Cercis. So that's what do they call Cercis again? Red bud, yeah. So Cercis canadensis, these are doubles, so the little pink pom-poms. And last but not least is hellebores. Hellebores, one of my favorite plants, deer resistant and quite drought tolerant. They need water though, but shade loving, so it kind of works. And spring blooming, so they're the first thing to bloom in the garden. They're usually up and going early, end of February, depending on the year. And they self-seed around, and I love that because sometimes you get different colors and they can be kind of fun. So lots of really good ones. These ones, as far as I know, are the new ones. Tropical Sunset, which is kind of nice. California Dreaming, which I really like that one because it's yellow. I like yellow as a color for the Helleborus orientalis. Sandy Shores, which is, I think, very decadent. It's almost bell-shaped, hanging downwards. Dark and Handsome, that's a good one. And this one is Childhood Sweetheart, and it's a double. Yep.
So your California Dream, is it an upward facing one? That's
Probably
the
not.
thing with
Hellebores. Yep. Yeah, I'm lucky. I have a little retaining wall through my whole garden, and I put my hellebores along the top of the retaining wall, and they all kind of sit there and they look at me and they're all happy. But they do, every once in a while, because they're evergreen, right? They keep their leaves through the winter. I don't do anything with them in the fall or anything other than just take off dead stuff, but I leave the foliage intact through the winter. And they sometimes, we don't get enough snow, and some of them freeze out, some varieties. It's just hit and miss, but I still have 6 or 8. I just say keep planting them. If you lose a couple every year, well then plant more, right? So they're definitely worth it. And to me, just one of the happy flowers in spring. I always love bulbs and things that shoot up. They just look great, and it's one of those things that I look forward to every year. And what I do with the hellebores then in the springtime is I go out and I just selectively clip out every single leaf off of the plant. And you'll see these bundles of flowers that are getting ready to push up in the middle. And I just take off all the foliage, clean it up completely, and just let the flowers push up. And then they come up, and they're often a little taller. Because I've removed the leaves, they seem to shoot up a little nice. And it's this beautiful bouquet. Gorgeous, and then it puts on all new leaves. But they,
because when I've been following these,
yep,
they are breeding upward facing ones.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. That's a fabulous idea.
That would be fabulous.
Bring them on. And especially, nice colors like these, they're just beautiful. It's just a great opportunity. So So that's basically it today. I have a bunch of clematis too. Of course, there's lots of clematis. This one's called Diamond Ball, and it's a beautiful double. And remember that clematis have both female and male flowers on the same plant. The female flowers are going to be double if it's a double variety, but the male flowers will be singles. So it's just kind of a fun thing. If you buy a double and you go like, I bought a double and the flowers are single, it's like, yeah, just wait. You'll get some double ones eventually. But it's a really good one. This one's new, Diamond Ball. And so that's it for today. I just wanted to remind everybody to check out our website, growercoach.com, and Grower Coach on YouTube. And please subscribe. Help build that channel. We got to get it going now that I'm semi-retired. That means now I only work, 6 days a week? But still, it's a nice thought. I don't have to get up as early. That's kind of a nice thing. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks, you guys. I guess we have time for a couple questions, or somebody's got to eat soon.